And welcome back to a brand new series of Crime Suspect. Each week we'll be unravelling some of the UK's most prolific crimes, as well as providing in-depth analysis on the criminality that plagues our nation. On the show today, missing or murdered? The case of Claudia Lawrence saw numerous appeals, arrests and searches, but her body has never been found. Now, as police launch a fresh investigation 15 years on, could one of the country's most intriguing unsolved crimes finally be solved? Next up, we'll be bringing you the best and worst of policing with our good cop, bad cop. And finally, it's your chance to book a crook as we show you this week's Wanted. Joining me for all of this today is criminologist and author James Treadwell, journalist and author Neil Root, who has written the excellent book Gone about the disappearance of Claudia Lawrence, editor and co-founder of the Steeple Times, Matthew Steeples, and last but certainly not least, former police inspector and now a visiting lecturer at Leeds Trinity University, Martin Holleran.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here.
Most people have no clue that in 2024, the best way to make money with Amazon is not with physical products. It's Amazon's.
Now you have the right to remain watching. This is Crime Suspect. This year marks the 15th anniversary since Claudia Lawrence vanished on the evening of March the 18th, 2009, sparking a £1 million manhunt and making it the biggest and most complex missing person inquiry in the history of North Yorkshire Police. Claudia was 35 when she disappeared on her way to work at York University. Police believe that she was murdered and have desperately probed into her past, her relationships and her work life in an effort to find her. Early in the investigation, a number of people were arrested, but no one has been charged. And despite a string of theories over the years, including fears she may have been trafficked to Amsterdam or moved to Cyprus, Claudia's disappearance, sadly, remains a mystery. Martin, the latest senior investigating officer to be in charge of this case, a detective called Wayne Fox, has said that silence is what is probably obstructing the inquiry. What do you think it would take for somebody who knows vital information to break that silence and come forward and tell what they know?
I think he makes a very good point, Peter. I think the idea that somebody within the community does know and is aware of potentially what happened to Claudia is probably true. And I think that people should feel safe in the knowledge that they will be supported by the police if they came forward. It's 15 years since Claudia disappeared, and I think now is a very important time to keep this in the public eye for the sake of Joan, her mother, and it's a time that somebody could come forward after 15 years and feel safe in the knowledge that they will be supported by the police service and the local community as well.
Yeah, because we often hear these days, don't we, when the police say allegiances might change over the years. That's a common line that they use. And also, on a number of other cases, the police have said, we have experience in looking after people that come forward. If a vital witness would have to have their life turned upside down because, for example, they had to go into witness protection, would you be confident that North Yorkshire would reinvent that person, look after them suitably and ensure that they had a satisfying life going forwards after that?
Absolutely. I appreciate that the person would have to give up a previous life and give up attachments that they've forged over a number of years, but I feel absolutely sure that North Yorkshire Police would support them in a future life-changing event that they needed to go through.
Neil, you've been the real boots on the ground, so to speak, as you wrote this highly commended book about Claudia's disappearance, and you had the cooperation of Claudia's late father, Peter. May he rest in peace. From everything that I've read about this case, this is not serious organised crime. So therefore, the necessity for somebody to perhaps go into witness protection and reinvent their life might not actually be a necessity. What's your thoughts on who may or may not be responsible?
Over the years, I mean, when I first wrote the book, which is 11 years ago now, I was very open-minded at the time because there were no pointers, and I entertained it could be a random predator or somebody she knew. But over time, I firmly come to the conclusion in my own mind, just my opinion, that it was definitely somebody she knew personally. And that's why I really don't believe a few years ago that people were pointing the finger at the convicted murderer Christopher Halliwell. I really didn't believe that he was somebody like him. But I also have come to the conclusion, actually I thought this quite early on, I think she never left for work that morning. I personally think that she went the evening before. I personally think when she spoke to her mother Joan, she might have been in the house or she might have been somewhere else. I've got a feeling she went to somebody's house and never left, or got in a car with somebody and never arrived at their house. A lot of the witness sightings on the early morning, maybe, although they had to be investigated, maybe slight red herrings, personally.
Just a quick question. In all the time that you spent on the ground as a journalist and author, were you ever warned off or subjected to any threats?
I was never actually threatened or warned off. I even spent a night in the Nag's Head, to get a feel of it. I mean, it's 3 years later, obviously.
Yeah.
And I listened, I went down to the bar for a few drinks, if I could pick anything up. I did find hostility, but it was mainly because Fleet Street had turned over Heworth 3 years previously. And I had people say, we don't talk about that anymore. We don't want to talk about that.
The reason I raise it is because I've read a lot of articles about threats being issued to journalists, so naturally I was going to ask you. And on that very note, threatening journalists attempting to report on Claudia's disappearance has been common. And according to one startled Sky News reporter, who was the North of England correspondent, Gerald Tubb, when he was investigating and reporting on Claudia's disappearance, he wrote an article in 2015, and he wrote, "For a privately educated daughter of a country solicitor, Claudia had some unusual acquaintances, and this remains the only missing person case where I've been warned off or threatened, not once, but twice." He also went on to say, "And why are there so many undercurrents to the mystery, with some people still unwilling to talk to journalists and others issuing warnings or threats?" Now, James, I heard some murmurings from this side of the room when Neil was speaking, but specifically when phones were mentioned.
I think Claudia's mobile phone, for me, holds many of the keys, and that's one of the reasons that the police have never fully revealed, for example, the geolocation of where those final phone calls to both her father and mother were made from. I think what we have to understand is that a narrative was established around this case very early on. The trap is easy to fall into, that this is an abduction, as it were. What we know with certainty, and we don't know a lot with certainty here, but we do know that her house was not the crime scene, the scene of Claudia's murder.
Don't even think about life insurance until you've heard this. Many people in the life insurance industry are absolutely furious about this little-known policy that's really rocked the industry with its
abduction.
Her mobile phone was deliberately disconnected at 12:05. But if Claudia did not leave her house on the morning, and if the eyewitness testimony that framed the investigation at the early stages was one of a number of errors, indeed, the very photo fit that was issued to look like Claudia with blonde hair didn't look like her at the time, there were mistakes made. And of course, her disappearance is only belatedly discovered. The definitive narrative that's kind of come out has been in the early stages the disappearance and then an abduction. And we don't know that that's the case. What we do know with a great degree of certainty is that when people come to harm, it's very, very rare that that happens at the hands of a stranger. It's far, far more likely that it's at the hands of a person or persons who are known to them. And I think what we likely see in this case is that all of the evidence is actually there already in the files and in the investigations. The reason that the police are appealing, and it's not just saying sometimes that people aren't telling us things. The police have also said at stages that people are deliberately lying to us. They are misleading us. I think that there are answers there, and there are answers there within a 10-mile location of when Claudia went missing and within a 10-hour window of that time. And the case is still solvable. It's very, very solvable.
I've got to agree with the points that have been made. I firmly believe that it is somebody that's known to Claudia, either that she's been in a relationship with or wanted to have a relationship with her. There must be some connection because, as we say, in most disappearances or most murder investigations or abductions, it is normally somebody who is known to the individual.
Yeah, about 95%.
Yes, indeed.
Of homicides are committed by someone known to the victim. Neil, did you get any hint or suggestion as to somebody who might be motivated to commit a crime like this?
There were several people, not naming any names, obviously.
Of course.
And there were one or two people who perhaps had slightly shady, slightly heavy local connections, which could raise some eyebrows, maybe. The kind of people who might go further than others, you know. There's also, it was big in the press that it could be like the wife of someone she had an affair with or something like that. I think that's possible, but I think that's, you know, unlikely because it's very extreme, you know. As James said, it's very solvable.
Matthew, it wasn't only some rather clumsy media coverage and inquiries into this case that irritated local people. I think the police were, some of their actions were frowned upon, particularly when they dug up the cellar of a pub.
Yes, there was a man who ran a pub, and the concrete that was dug up was 20 years old, and he tried to point this out to the police, and they still dug up his cellar, and he ended up campaigning with Theresa May about this matter of intrusion, and he was the father of 5 children, and he was very, very upset about this, and, you know, there was no evidence that she had been at his particular pub. The betrayal of this lady, as someone who was spending all her time in pubs, if that had been a man, it would have been handled very differently. It would be, you know, oh, good for him, he's enjoying himself, he's having a few flings and this, that, and the other. But the portrayal of her as that kind of woman, her mother speaks of her daughter as, you know, someone who was decent, good faith, and happy, and kept in contact with her. But what I did find curious was, as was said earlier, people compartmentalize their lives. The mother spoke of how she didn't really go to her daughter's house. She didn't really know what went on at that house. They used to meet in public places. So there was obviously some part of her life that something happened. The fact she didn't take her passport from the house, you know, the house was left in a tidy fashion, which if somebody is abducted, there's generally a bit of a struggle. You would expect to have found something amiss there.
And there is, of course, no harm whatsoever, and it's against no laws of the land to compartmentalise your life, to have some secrets that you don't tell other people, and it's certainly not a crime to enjoy a drink in a pub. James, talking of Claudia's home address, was there any evidence of any property missing or any disturbance there whatsoever?
There's no evidence of a disturbance. But what we know is that there were several items missing from Claudia's home. Her Chef White said a rucksack and her mobile phone have never been traced. I think we also don't know, because it's never been revealed, at what point the police know that she was last at the property. So there is the case of it being an abduction on her way to work relies on her stopping the night in that accommodation, leaving the next morning. And we don't know that that's ever happened. It may well have been that she's returned, stayed some time, and left again. The thing that's interesting about that, and Neil's already picked up on it, if people leave, they get seen. Even in smaller village communities in the evening, cars are picked up on CCTV. People's movements are heard. While these might not be metropolitan centre, it might not be a metropolitan centre like Birmingham or London. People hear doors slamming. They hear voices. People see people's movements.
But there is, of course, a CCTV sighting at 5:50 a.m. of a man with a hoodie at the back of Claudia's property. As a police inspector, former police inspector, surely you would think that of potential significance.
Oh yeah, I think some of the CCTV is very significant. When you see the person who is probably going to be male, by the look of it, I know it's poor and grainy, but you would suggest that it probably was a male, goes round the back of the house and then returns a few minutes later. I think the very important bit is where somebody is then walking along the main road and that individual pauses deliberately to allow that person to walk along the main road. There is no need, unless you do not want to be seen or recognised, there's no need for you to pause. There was plenty of room, plenty of space. So I think that particular piece of evidence there is really significant and important.
And possibly plays into what we've heard so much about people not saying what they know, potentially. So 15 years on, Neil, I'm a sickeningly optimistic sort of bloke, but I'll set that aside. What do you think about the likelihood of this case ever being solved?
I honestly do think it will be solved. I really do. I think there's so many cases internationally that have been solved. Hopefully it's going to be in our lifetime. And I do hope it's going to be the next few years, obviously, so that Claudia's mother, Joan, is still here, to find the answer. And of course, her sister, Ali, as well. It's just a case of somebody's got to break that silence. And I really do think somebody will break that silence.
Well, I hope in some way that this upcoming podcast that I know is going to drop in 2 or 3 weeks or time might well help. And I hope that this today will go some way, perhaps, towards persuading that person who knows the truth, who